It's a BookFest award winner spotlight. Robin Korejko, The Spectrum of Storytelling. In children's books, masks are sometimes more than costumes because they often mirror how neurodivergent kids hide parts of themselves in order to fit in. Storytelling can lift those masks and empower young readers and reflect the diverse experiences that exist across the entire spectrum. Drawing from her journey as a reader, a parent, and an author, and congratulations again on being a BookFest award winner. Robin writes with authentic, neuro-spicy voices that we're going to learn more about in this conversation today. Your story is just a heartfelt reminder that books do so much more than entertain. They can also help liberate us. Robin, how you doing today?
Hi there. I'm doing really good. How are you?
I'm excellent. Now let's get into why is it important for children to be able to see characters who reflect themselves, who mirror who they are wherever they might be on that spectrum.
Yeah, so the neurodivergent experience is kind of complex, like whether you're diagnosed or not, and especially in a world where we have access to information. So kids now can go, hey, I think that I might be autistic, I might be ADHD, and they can just go pop on Google and start Googling symptoms, right? So there's so many feelings, there's so much that goes along with this neurodivergence journey, and it's usually kind of like a long one for most people. And there's just so many feelings, like not just like mushy, like emotional feelings, like literal sensory, like most neuro spicy people, they're sensory driven or they're sensory aversions. So, because it's so complex, right, it often can feel very isolating. There aren't usually languaging or words for a lot of the struggles that happen internally, and then externally, we're trying to pretend because it looks like the people around us are doing just fine, and we're like, well, what's wrong with me? So you can feel kind of like the out. I know for me anyway, like I I felt like the outcast. I felt like the weirdo. I felt invisible. And I didn't at the time, back in my day, like I didn't know why. And it was lonely. It was really lonely. I felt alone as a kid. I would try to talk to my parents, but they didn't quite understand what I was saying. Um, so I was trying to figure out what was normal, quote unquote, and what I was doing wrong, why I wasn't fitting in with the other kids, why I was the one squirming in my seat when everybody just seemed so comfortable, just even little things like that. So as a kid, when I read books like Matilda or Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, suddenly a lot of those feelings of loneliness like started to dissipate. And even something as little as, when an author makes a comment about a main character fidgeting in their school seat or something, like it was like, oh, okay, maybe it's not so weird after all. Maybe I'm not so alone in the world because somebody wrote those words, like, right? Like somebody wrote those words down, which means there must be understanding somewhere in the world, even if I can't find it yet. And books were, and characters specifically, it gave me a safe space to start unpacking some of the stuff that didn't make sense inside of me.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that in some capacity. And it has come a long way. I remember myself, and I think I'm a little bit older than you, but back in my day as well, Robin, we just didn't have these terms, or if they did, they seemed kind of clinical, and we weren't applying them to the kids in the classroom. And if we were, they were still that made them even more of an other. It didn't help in uniting anybody. It further divided us. So I like the way you describe neuro spicy voices. Can you unpack that a little bit and define what you mean by a neuro spicy voice and why that feels so authentic to young readers?
Yeah, sure. And just to echo what you were saying, like something struck me. It's like not only was there not languaging back then, but we as young women, right? Like certainly girls were not, when I was diagnosed ADHD as an adult, I went, oh, all of this makes sense, right? So, when I think about my own experience, my own journey, my own story, um, I didn't know I was look what I was looking for in characters back then, right? Because we're talking about this lack of languaging, right? So now we're trying to play catch up. We're trying to like fill in the gaps. And when I was thinking about what is it that I wanted or needed to see as not just as a reader, but like as someone reading books to my children that were going to help them also feel supported and safe as neurodivergent kids. And it's like those little spaces in dialogue, right? Where there's this, right? We're showing through storytelling, they're showing the internal struggle, right? That lives under the smile, that there is something going on in the background, right? And I think, in my humble opinion, books are like the best way to highlight the ways that these inner and outer worlds play off of one another, right? It's a character, fidgeting in their seat. It's like a gap in dialogue. It's an awkward pause, right? Even the wording, like awkward pause in a book was like, oh, so other people, like this is neuro-spicy friendly, right? And maybe the main character, it doesn't even matter if the main character is or isn't neurodivergent, but it matters to a neurospicy person that there are like telltale signs that who we are as and how we express that voice, like it's real, right? And because it starts to feel like it's not real anymore. And I remember the one book, it was like Babysitter's Club, and they would talk about the discourse of friendships, and I had a really hard time like making and keeping friends, partially because I was constantly trying to like imprint proper social behavior. So, I mean, like when I look back on it now, I'm like, oh, did that maybe like hinder my friendships, my relationships? But then when I would go into these books or these spaces where there was like discord in friendships and seeing what they were like arguing over, it also helped me understand maybe some context I had missed, or, maybe some little nuance or social cue that had flown over my head. So I think that neurospicy voices in for young readers like just gives them a chance to process a lot of stuff that has question marks naturally.
Yeah, and you've talked about the masks that kids will wear or adults will wear too. Can you
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit? Talk about and maybe also speak to the kids who are out there listening, watching, as well as the adults. What do they need to hear about the masks that we wear and when it might be safe to take them off?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I could talk forever about masks. So masking is our body's way of, protecting us. It's a response to, overwhelm, and making sure our systems are organized, or we're doing the best we can to navigate our day-to-day lives, right? And every time somebody asks me about masking, I think of my son, who it's so sweet when he comes in the front door, right? He strips off all of his gear, right? Like his backpack, his jacket, right? And it's almost like the mask is coming off, right? The armor is coming off, and it's like, oh, thank God I'm home. I'm home. Like I don't have to pretend anymore. I'm exhausted from pretending, right? And then we'll read a book together, or we'll do something together, right? And that becomes the safe space. It's the portal to like unspoken words. It's like it's permission to let go of having to worry about whether we've said or done the right thing all day, because there's that constant pressure underneath every single interaction. So I think of him every time, and specifically when it comes to books, and you know fiction, nonfiction. It doesn't even matter. Like the book becomes the safe place, right? The book becomes the safe place for all of these things to exist, right? So not only does it create a safe place for neurodivergence, but when like maybe your whole family is like reading the same book, like if I read the same book or me and my kid, like so my son and I like we were talking about masking one day and I was saying how I wanted to write a Halloween story about like masking and he was like, "Oh, well like I hated wearing masks on Halloween because I do that all the time." And I was like, "Tell me more." Like, tell me more about this, right? Like what does that mean to you? And he poured out an entire framework to a story about a kid who's like, I refuse to wear a mask on Halloween. I do this all year round, and proceeded to share like how the characters would all interact with this. And I'm like, okay, not only is this story like for me, it was resonating for me because I was reflecting on like my inner child, but I'm like, this would be important for his friends to read. So it kind of books give us an opportunity and storytelling gives us an opportunity to understand like the spectrum of how these things play out and how communication plays out in neurodivergent people.
Communication with your son too. Robin, that is beautiful as a mom with their child to be able to share that and make that connection in that way as an author, as a writer, because he helped you write. Your
Yep.
son is your co-author. How
Yep.
does
Oh,
that
he's getting all
feel?
the credit on that book. He's getting all the credit on that book. It's really cool. Like it feels oh, I'm getting emotional. It feels really, really good because I went from being a kid who was so desperate to be seen, to be heard, to understood, to understand about my passion about stories and characters. And now I have these really cool conversations with my son who has these brilliant ideas. And I thought to myself, like, this is to me, this is the way that when we engage with curiosity, it gives our kids a chance to explore these worlds and there's no judgment, there's no shame, there's no guilt. Like it just exists. So yeah, it's just it makes me very emotional.
Oh, I can definitely understand that. I'm getting a little emotional myself. Um, what do you want to say to the parents, educators out there, librarians? The BookFest community brings in so many different types of people because we're talking about our love of books and literature. But what would you want to say to them who may want to better support the neurodivergent kids that are in their lives, especially as it happens through books?
Yeah, and that's what drew me to the BookFest community. Like when I started as an author and I was kind of like poking around, I was like, where is there a safe space, right? It's like my default um thinking. It's like where is it safe for me, not just me as a parent, but me as a neurodivergent person, right? Because I'm talking about things that seem sometimes they seem so out there, even though to me they're not. But the one thing that I want to say is we neuro-spicy folk we get lost in the mask. We kind of forget, right? We forget who we are. We get so consumed with being accepted. We get really um we want to make sure that we're pleasing the people around us and at the cost of ourselves and our expression, not on purpose, but because it's just constantly running in the background that we are maybe out of place or a little quirky or a little weird, which gets pointed out to us occasionally, all right? So we tend to copy or mimic what we think is acceptable behavior, and then that kind of makes us even weirder because they're like, "What are you doing?" Right? They know we're not being authentic to ourselves. For me, I was always worried about what I was or wasn't allowed to say, and books became like the soul tether, right? Books became this way to get me back to who I was over and over again because I could move from Goosebumps to Matilda, and nobody gave me, it was like, oh, no, 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 this is who I am deep down. I'm equal parts, like, love, my love for horror meets my very sensitive, mushy, emotional. These two things can exist, even though sometimes out in the real world, like, I say the real world, but, out in public, it feels like those things are contradictory to some people. And, parents, my librarian, I'm sorry, I just, I just remembered this story. Like, I'll never forget my librarian, my local librarian.
Mhm.
I loved the library as a kid. Loved the library. I could spend hours there. And I'll never forget the day that I was waiting for a Goosebumps book, and she pulled that and then put The Secret Garden on top of it. And it was like, oh my God, like, it was like one of the first times I think I felt seen, like, for real. Like, it was like, these are for you. Like, this encompasses, like, you. And it was this really sweet moment. And I would encourage, the adults, the teachers, the librarians, and the people who are um, face to face with kids every day. Like, when you approach kids with that eagerness of, like, who are you? Right? Who are you? Right? When you get curious about, you know, like, the person that exists under the behaviors, or, like, the outbursts, it goes a long way, right? I'm 42 years old, and I can remember that story of being a tiny girl, right? And how the librarian impacted me, right? And now I'm here in this really cool kind of full circle moment, being like, yeah, this matters. It makes a difference. Those little tiny gestures are like everything.
Librarians really need to start wearing capes, don't
They
they?
really do.
They're, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You've mentioned growing up and your parents, they didn't quite understand you. Can you talk about that a little bit more and maybe reflect a bit on what parents nowadays, we have so much more information at our fingertips. It's easier to identify, perhaps. But talk a little bit, Robin, about as you were growing up and having your own parents that just kind of didn't get it, and what parents nowadays can maybe do so they are more responsive and maybe more accepting.
Yeah, I think that my parents were my parents were just trying to do, what they thought was right. Um, and I get that, right? I'm an adult who is completely aware now that they were parenting based off of how they were raised, right or wrong. Um, and now, right, for me, it went okay. So when I became a mother, right, when I stepped into motherhood, right, it was I had this, like, kind of fantasy about it, about what motherhood would be, and then, like, the reality of it starts to smack you in the face every single day. Um and you have this vision of who you are as a parent, right? And what no one tells you is you're going to get confronted with, like, a little version of you, like, every single day, every single day, right? And when you grow up feeling really complex feelings about yourself, it does impact and influence your parenting. So, for me, it was okay. I'd watch my kid, I'd see, like, a little blip of me, and I'd go, wait a sec. I know, I know what that is. Like, there I am. And there's this kind of, like, pause. There's this moment between, what my kid is expressing behaviorally, or not even behaviorally, but just expressing, or communicating, and my interpretation of this, and how that was handled when I was a child, essentially. And I had to really dig into those moments and go, what did I need? What did I need as a kid versus you know, what was passed down through, parenting techniques that may or may not work for me, especially for a neurodivergent, by the way, because neurodivergence is just kind of, like, inherently, like, over complicate, especially when you're a kid. Like you feel all the feelings, and then when you go back get them back out with words, you end up crying because you because it's so hard to translate, right? And I can see now how my parents would look at me melting down and wanting to fix it, and that is inherently like a good desire. That's a good thing. But what I needed was co-regulation. What I needed was someone to sit with me and go, yeah, man, I'd be freaking out too if I was feeling overwhelmed, or the sounds were too loud, or there was like a startling image on the TV screen. So it took me a really long time, and I have three kids, especially in their toddler years, to like kind of like rein those parts in that were like uncomfortable with seeing myself, and like how I would deal with little me, right? Versus how little me was banished to her room for crying too much, right? You know, and I just think it's time. We have so much information in a day and age where we have so much information, in a day and age where the conversation around neurodivergence and the understanding of the spectrum of how this presents itself in each individual person is so radically different, right? It makes more and more sense to be like, hey, like let's get to know you, and instead of saying like, oh, don't do that, right? Don't do that thing that makes me uncomfortable. It's like, okay, well, why are you doing that? What's going on, right? Is this a sensory
Yeah.
trigger? Or is it, you know, there's a conversation that exists in that pause, in that space. And that was one that I was desperate to have, both as a parent and as a very sad little kid.
We talk about the spectrum, and in many ways, that's what the spectrum is trying to understand, because each child, each person is different. And it can be very confusing for somebody who may look at the world in more absolutes or
Yep.
more black and white. Why can't I treat this child this way? It works for the other children. So the adult themselves might be having a hard time kind of defining and working with, because of this idea of the spectrum. And can you speak to
Yeah.
that a little bit? What do we mean when we talk about a spectrum?
Oh my God, I could, again, this is another topic I could talk forever about. Because I have three neurodivergents. Their presentation of neurodivergence is all totally different. Like I have one that is hyper verbal. And I notice his processing, he does better when he can process things verbally. I have another one who needs more solitude. He go right, and for me, like at first, I was taking these things personal, right? Like I would have, you know, a neurodivergent who would go away. He would shut himself in his room, and I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing wrong? Like, did I do something wrong? And then, you know, as I would kind of learn the nature of his overstimulation and what overstimulated him, because he's far more of a sensory processing, that's the stuff that what kicks him offline, so to speak. And he's just like, no, I just need to stimulate. It has nothing to do with you, right? Whereas I have another kid who's like, mom, like I need to talk. I need to talk this out right now, right? And you have this wild array of, you know, autism presentations, ADHD, and then I have a child with dyslexia. I have a child with math dyslexia. So I have a reading dyslexia, I have a math dyslexia, I have one with auditory processing disorder. And like, so learning not just the communication uh needs of each kid, but remembering in my own neurodivergent brain how to switch between them. Like, you know, I'm like, when it comes to the one that's hyperverbal, I'll be like, okay, go in your room, and then I'm like, oh wait, no, 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 what do you want? Like let's talk about it, you know. So, um, it's kind of a really cool puzzle you get to put together every day. You know, and then they change because they grow, and yeah,
It's a delightful puzzle, might I
it
add.
is. I think it's a lot of fun. You know, it's like each new little piece of information is like it's it reminds me of those books as a kid where like you read the story and and you pick and it's like, okay, go to page 82, right? And
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
that's what it feels like, is those books that you get to
And
choose the stories.
choose, yeah, choose your own adventure type
Yeah,
books.
yeah, 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 exactly. Exactly,
Absolutely.
that's parenting.
As a writer, you talk about the communication, especially when you were little, and the melting down and feeling like you weren't being heard and it was all coming out. How does that, as a writer, being able to communicate as a writer, is that giving you an outlet? How does that feel?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I am constantly writing from the voice of my melting down inner child. I have a new book coming out. It's called The Littlest Empath, and that there's actually a chapter in there called Meltdown. And it's a chapter where I give her, permission
Mhm.
to have a, take in the absurdity of the neurodivergent experience, and cry, right? And furthermore, as a writer, give myself permission to write about that, because that also took time. Like I was like, nobody's going to want to read this. Nobody's going to want to read a little girl crying to herself in the bathroom for 3 4 however long it goes on, 3 or 4 paragraphs, a page. I think it's a page. But when I read it back, I went, no, this is really important. People, it's important to me. It's important to readers that, there's so much depth of feeling. There's so much that, you know, area to explore and through that I think can only be explored through writing, right? And I needed to give myself and my books like space to do that. Like give them permission to also have a voice and be like, you know what, it's okay if you take up space. It's okay.
Yeah.
You're worth it.
Yeah. And sometimes spending a page on that meltdown in the bathroom, maybe we didn't have that meltdown in the bathroom ourselves, but in some moment in our lives, we can identify with that. So that just goes back to that connection, that feeling of being heard and understood. Robin, if you could whisper one sentence into the ear of a neurodivergent child who feels unseen right now, what would you tell them?
Oh, that hit me. Um, I would say, like, I know you feel it, like when people are uncomfortable around you, like even if people aren't using words, but like, no, it's not you. You're not the reason people are uncomfortable, and you don't have to fix that. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with them either, but like you're perfect as you are right here and right now.
That's beautiful. And your writing is so beautiful, Robin.
Oh, thank
Thank you.
you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing it with us. And just so everybody knows, they can find out more about Robin. She has a speaker page on the BookFest website, as well as a book page. We're putting links in the chat on the side. And you already teased us. Got more books coming down the
Oh,
pipe.
tons.
Tons. All right. All
Yeah.
right. So you mentioned it. So you teased it a little bit. What else can we expect from you coming down the road?
Yeah, so the Littlest Empath comes out in November. I'm so excited. This will be my first adventure in um middle grade fiction. And I tried to pull from my inspirations as a child, which was very like R.L. Stein, basically like R.L. Stein like meets like Babysitter's Club. Like how do we mash these worlds together? That was like,
Mhm.
and portray the essence of the neurodivergent, the highly sensitive, right? The empathetic, deeply feeling main character whose name is Kenley. And I'm obsessed with her. She's just so cool. And I have 5 children's books out now, one of which is actually about meltdowns. And then another area that I'm getting into is I'm going to start writing short stories that are fictionalized short stories about motherhood, and they're going to play off the children's books. And I'm really, really excited about this project. I have no idea what it's going to look like yet. but I have an idea, and yeah, I think it's going to be really cool.
That sounds really interesting. Okay, keep us posted about that. Thank you again for sharing your books and your insights. This has been such a stimulating dialogue, Robin. Thank you so much for being a part
Thank
of the
you.
BookFest.
Thank you so much.